It is time right now to start considering dissection. And with dissection comes a whole bunch of terms that we want to get familiar with so that as we begin to explore how to dissect, we can also consider the whole idea of the anatomy of organisms, because they use the same terminology based upon what part of the body we're looking at. To give you an idea of what we're talking about, let's first consider this cute little horsey. And let's say we've got this veterinarian who needs to do surgery, or maybe something even worse, has to do a little necropsy or dissection to see what's going on. First of all, if we think about the horse's body in general, we have what's known as the long axis. The long axis basically goes from its head all the way to its tail. So if you look at the length here, it's longer this direction than it is wide. So that's the long axis. And we would say that this long axis is known as the longitudinal direction. So if we were to cut an organism along the longitudinal direction, it would be going from head to tail, for example. But we have another direction that's going to be perpendicular to this longitudinal direction. It's at a right angle. And this is known as a transverse direction. So now, if we're going to be cutting it this direction, we're going to be separating the front half from the rear end. That is transverse. In addition to that, we have some other terms we want to pay attention to. First one is, if we focus on the head, it's got a skull. We call it the cranium. And the term that's often used for this is called the cranial aspect of the organism. So if the head is cranial, guess what the tail's called? And don't say tail. It's going to be cranial versus caudal. So caudal is going to be the back end region. Cranial is the front end region. What about back versus belly? What kind of terms do we have there? Associated with the back, it is called the dorsal region of the organism. And one way to remember that is if you're at the beach and all of a sudden you're swimming along and you see this thing come up out of the water. And you go, oh my goodness, that's a shark. And you say that based upon seeing this structure. What do we call that portion of the shark that's coming off of its back? We call it the dorsal fin, correct? Well, I'm going to put this little visual here so you remember it. We don't see too many horses with dorsal fins, but that's going to be the terminology tied to it. So if dorsal is back, what is the term associated with the belly? The term given is ventral. So ventral is on the belly side, dorsal is going to be on the back side. Show this one more time with these organisms. Let's say we got this polar bear and it decides to stand upward. Now consider this creature, which would be the longitudinal direction? Is it going to be going this way or is it going that way? And hopefully you've decided it's going to be going that way. Longitudinal, the long axis, is longer this direction than going that direction. What about if we think of the term transverse direction? Where do we want to look now? Well, it's going to be at a right angle. One way that I think about this, imagine that you're looking at a tree. It's upright, it's going vertical. When we cut a tree, we cut it transversely. So maybe that will help you if you think of something upright. Now, how do we tie those other terms? We said, of course, cranial would be up here, and then we could have caudal, more the back end over here if the animal is going to be on all fours. We also use some other terms. If we're looking at the front portion of the organism, we'd say that's the anterior view. So if I'm looking at you and we're facing one another, I'm looking at your anterior view, you're looking at my anterior view. The opposite of the anterior view would be the posterior view. So that would be looking at that individual from behind. So we have posterior and anterior. Sometimes we'll be using that more in human medicine than veterinary medicine. What did we call this portion here along the back? That's known as the dorsal region. What do we call this portion right over here? Well, that's going to be our ventral region. And those are going to be some terms that we're going to see are going to be very important as we begin to start looking at the animal kingdom and better understanding the anatomy of all these amazing creatures that God has designed.